The lie was the color of dust on a dead moth's wing. It drifted from the fruit seller's mouth, a dull, listless gray thread that coiled around the bruised apple he held out. "Freshest of the harvest, miss," he chirped, his voice a bright, polished stone. But the thread told the truth. It was weak, frayed, and spoke of cellars and rot. Lyra simply nodded, her gaze fixed not on the apple, but on the tangled web that surrounded the man. Every living thing, every object, every fey-blessed soul in the village of Silverwood was anchored by them. Golden threads, radiant and humming with truth, shimmered from the hearts of honest folk. Gray, brittle strands of deceit clung to the words of the dishonest. She saw them all, a constant, chaotic tapestry that only she could perceive. To everyone else, Lyra was staring at nothing. She moved away from the stall, her worn leather boots silent on the cobblestones. The market was a sensory nightmare. 1,000 conversations created a blinding cat's cradle of threads. A mother cooed at her child, a brilliant, pure gold cord of love pulsing between them. Two merchants haggled, their words a messy snarl of gray lies and sharp, glittering threads of avarice. It was overwhelming, a silent symphony of sincerity and falsehood that left her perpetually exhausted. The villagers gave her a wide berth. They always did. They called her Thread-Mad Lyra, or Whisper Eyes. They saw a pale, slender girl with silver hair so light it was almost white, and eyes the color of a stormy sea that never seemed to focus on anything properly. They saw her flinch at a kind word that was secretly laced with pity, a golden thread tangled with sickly gray. They saw her smile faintly at a moss-covered stone, seeing the pure, simple golden thread of its existence, its truth. They saw madness. Lyra felt a familiar pang of isolation. She lowered her head, pulling the hood of her coarse brown cloak further over her face, and tried to focus on the ground. It was easier here. The stones had no intention, no capacity to lie. Their threads were simple, steadfast gold. But even the stones were beginning to look wrong. A creeping wrongness had been seeping into Silverwood for months. It was a slow, insidious thief. Lyra saw it in the threads. She called it the decay. It started at the edges of the forest, a creeping mist that wasn't quite mist. Where it touched, the vibrant gold of truth grew dim. A week ago, the cluster of sun-petal flowers by the old well had been a beacon of radiant gold. Now, their threads were tarnished as if coated in ash. The petals themselves, once a fiery orange, were a pale, sickly yellow. The decay did more than steal color. It stole memory. It stole truth. Old Man Hemlock, the village storyteller, had forgotten the ending to the Lay of the Sunken Moon, a tale his grandfather had taught him. Lyra had watched in horror as the beautiful, complex golden thread of the memory in his mind grew brittle, cracked, and then dissolved into dust. He was left blinking, confused, a gaping hole in his past. The villagers had laughed it off as old age, but Lyra knew better. The decay had eaten the story. A shiver traced its way down her spine, cold and sharp. This was why the village elders were meeting today. The fear in Silverwood was a palpable thing, a suffocating blanket of gray threads as people whispered reassurances they didn't believe. She made her way to the village square, where the elder council met beneath the ancient sovereign oak. The tree was the heart of the village, and its great sprawling branches were usually a magnificent corona of golden truth. But now even its leaves were tinged with brown, and the golden light of its life thread seemed faint, flickering like a dying candle. The entire village was gathered, their faces tight with anxiety. Lyra remained at the very edge of the crowd, a ghost among her own people. She saw Elder Maeve stand, her face a mask of grim determination. The threads that spun from her mouth were a tangled, ugly mess, a thick, roiling gray of fear, threaded with a thin, sharp gold of terrible resolve. "People of Silverwood," Maeve began, her voice straining to remain steady. "The blight that falls upon our lands, the fading, it is beyond our power to stop." A wave of murmurs rippled through the crowd. Lyra saw hundreds of gray threads of panic begin to weave through the air. The decay, the fading, they had names for it now, but a name did not lessen its terror. "The lords of the summer court offer no aid," another elder, Borin, added, his voice heavy. His thread was a murky, resentful gray. They hoard their magic, barring their gates against the encroaching silence. Lyra knew this to be true. The Fae, for all their power and beauty, were creatures of perfection. They would not suffer a blemish like the decay. They would sooner cut off a limb than tend to its sickness. "But there is another," Maeve said, pausing. The air grew thick with anticipation. "A power older than the summer court, one who has offered sanctuary." Lyra's eyes narrowed. She watched the threads around Maeve with intense focus. A new thread was forming, born of her words. It was a strange color, not gold, not gray, but a deep, bruised purple of myth and dread. "King Kaelen of the Shadowed Vale has made a pact." A collective gasp went through the crowd. Names were whispered on the air, each one a thread of fear. The Blind King, the Ashen King, the Lord of the Forgotten Castle. Kaelen was a spectre, a cautionary tale told to frightened children. A Fey king from a forgotten court who, centuries ago, had lost his sight to some terrible curse and retreated into his mountain kingdom, never to be seen again. His lands were said to be eternally shrouded in twilight, a place where colors went to die. "He has the power to halt the decay," Maeve continued, her voice gaining strength. The golden thread of her resolve burned brighter. "His fortress, the Obsidian Keep, is immune to its touch. He has offered to extend his protection over Silverwood." A flicker of hope ignited in the crowd. Golden threads of relief began to sprout, tentative and weak.
But Lyra felt a knot of dread tighten in her stomach.
Such power did not come without a price. The Fae never gave gifts.
They only made bargains.
"What does he want?" a man shouted from the crowd. "Gold? Warriors?" Elder Maeve's eyes scanned the crowd, her gaze passing over Lyra for a fraction of a second before moving on. But in that moment, Lyra saw it, a thread of pure shimmering gold. The terrible, undeniable truth of the bargain shot from Maeve's heart and connected directly to her. Lyra's breath hitched. "No, King Kaelen requires no gold, no soldiers," Maeve announced, her voice echoing in the sudden silence. "His price is specific. He claims the decay is a sickness of truth, a plague of perception. To fight it, He requires a tool that can perceive what others cannot. The silence deepened. Every villager looked at their neighbor, confused. Lyra stood frozen, the golden thread from Maeve's heart still tethered to her, a searing brand against her soul.
She felt like a moth pinned to a board.
She felt like a moth pinned to a board. He requires a tribute, Maeve said, her voice dropping to a near whisper. He asks for the one the village calls Threadmad. He asks for the girl who sees what is not there. Every head in the square turned, every eye fixed upon her. For the first time in her life, Lyra was the center of attention. She was bombarded by a tidal wave of threads, thick, surging gray cords of relief from the villagers. Thank the gods. It's not me, not my child. Tiny, flickering golden threads of pity from the few who had ever shown her kindness, and from the elders a heavy, suffocating web of gray guilt wrapped around a core of golden certainty. They were saving their village. The price was her. Lyra looked from face to terrified face. These were the people who had scorned her, feared her, and ignored her. Now, they were sacrificing her to a mythical monster to save themselves. A bitter laugh almost escaped her lips. Her curse, the thing that had made her an outcast, was now the only thing of value she possessed. She did not scream. She did not run. What was the point? To run would be a lie, and she was so very tired of lies. Instead, she lifted her chin, her storm-gray eyes meeting Elder Maeve's across the square. The golden thread connecting them pulsed with a terrible, vibrant light. The truth. 2 village guards, their faces pale and their movements hesitant, began to walk toward her. The crowd parted for them, a silent, shuffling sea of bodies. Lyra closed her eyes for a moment, taking a deep breath. For her entire life, her vision had been a curse, a torment that separated her from the world. Now, a blind king in a shadowed castle wanted it. He wanted her. For the first time, her madness had a purpose. She wasn't sure if that was a blessing or a curse far worse than the one she was already living. When she opened her eyes, the guards were before her. Their hands were gentle as they took her arms, as if they were handling a fragile, haunted doll. She did not resist. She let them lead her through the silent crowd, her gaze fixed on the darkening sky. She was being taken to the land of shadows, a tribute for a blind king. And as they walked her toward her fate, a single, terrifying thought echoed in her mind. What does a blind man want with a girl who can see the truth? The journey to the shadowed vale was a lesson in decay. The 2 guards, a grim-faced man named Fen, and a younger, nervous boy called Rorik, said nothing to her. They didn't need to. The threads of their emotions were a screaming testament to their fear. Fen's stoicism was a carefully constructed lie of gray wrapped around a jagged golden thread of pure terror. Rorik didn't even bother with the lie. His fear was a frantic, trembling gold that vibrated with every step the horses took. Lyra watched the world bleed out. As they rode north, leaving the relative vibrancy of Silverwood behind, the landscape began to surrender. The lush green of the forest canopy faded to a muted olive drab. The brilliant golden threads of life that pulsed in every tree grew thin and weak, like strained wires about to snap. The birdsong dwindled, replaced by a profound, unnatural silence that seemed to swallow sound. She had seen the decay's touch before. in a patch of flowers, or a single person's memory. But this was different. This was an entire land succumbing to a slow, creeping death. It was a world losing its truth. By the second day, the sun itself seemed a distant, watery orb, its light struggling to pierce the perpetual twilight that clung to the mountains ahead. These were the borders of the shadowed vale. The air grew sharp and cold, carrying a scent like old stones and forgotten sorrows. Rorik's horse shied, its thread of animal panic a bright, startling flash in the gloom. "We're close," Fen grunted, his gaze fixed on the jagged peaks that clawed at the sky. He wouldn't look at Lyra. To him, she was no longer a person. She was a tribute, a piece of living currency to be delivered. Then she saw it. Perched on the highest, most desolate peak was a structure that defied the laws of light and reason, the Obsidian Keep. It wasn't a castle of jagged spires and monstrous gargoyles. It was a fortress of smooth, seamless black stone that drank the light. Where normal stone would reflect the pale sky, the obsidian offered nothing back, creating a perfect, empty silhouette against the horizon. It was a hole in the world, a place of absolute negation. Its life thread was not gold, but a deep, silent, pulsating indigo, a color of ancient power and profound loneliness. The path to the keep was a winding, treacherous road carved into the mountainside. As they drew closer, the silence became absolute. There were no sentries on the walls, no banners snapping in the wind. The only sign of life was the great gate, a sheet of polished obsidian twice the height of a man, that stood silently closed. Fen and Rorik dismounted, their movements stiff. They helped Lyra down, their hands trembling as they did so. "This is as far as we go," Fen said, his voice barely a whisper. He untied a small sack from his horse. Rations. Water. He placed it at her feet, a pathetic offering to the ghost they were feeding. Rorik simply stared at the gate, his face as pale as bone. The legends say, no one who enters ever leaves. His thread of belief in this tale was a stark, unwavering gold. As if hearing his words, a low groan echoed from the keep, and the great obsidian gate began to swing inward, opening onto a courtyard of perfect, suffocating darkness. It moved with an impossible smoothness, utterly silent. That was the final straw for the guards. Rorik let out a choked cry, scrambled onto his horse, and galloped back down the path without a second look. Fen hesitated for a moment, his eyes meeting Lyra's. She saw a flicker of gold pity, perhaps even shame, before he too turned and fled, leaving her alone in the crushing silence of the vale. Lyra stood before the yawning gateway, the small sack at her feet. The indigo thread of the castle's life pulsed from within, a silent invitation. It felt less like a threat and more like a sigh of resignation. Taking a shaky breath, she stepped across the threshold. The moment she entered, the gate swung shut behind her, sealing her in with a soft, final thud. The courtyard was vast and empty, paved with the same light-devouring stone. She crossed it, her soft boots making no sound, and entered the main hall of the keep. The air inside was cold and still, thick with the dust of centuries. Faint beams of the gray twilight filtered through impossibly high, arched windows, illuminating dancing motes of dust in the cavernous space. Great tapestries hung on the walls, but their colors had long since surrendered to the decay, leaving them as nothing more than immense gray shrouds. The threads of their stories were broken, dissolved into nothing. She was utterly alone, yet she felt a pull. It was the indigo thread, stronger now, humming with a low, resonant frequency. It tugged at her senses, a guide rope in the oppressive silence. She followed it, walking deeper into the heart of the keep, past silent armories and vast empty libraries where the books sat rotting on their shelves. The thread led her to a pair of towering doors carved from white weirwood, the only splash of light in the entire fortress. They swung open at her approach, revealing the throne room. It was a hall of breathtaking emptiness. The walls were unadorned obsidian, the ceiling lost in shadow. At the far end, upon a dais of 3 shallow steps, sat a throne carved from a single massive piece of obsidian, and on the throne sat the king. He was unnaturally still, more a statue than a man. He was fey. That much was clear from the elegant lines of his face and the faint, regal point of his ears. His long hair was the color of tarnished silver, cascading over the high, dark collar of his tunic. His skin was pale, like white marble, and his form was lean and graceful, though he held a tension in his shoulders that spoke of immense, unending strain. His eyes were open. They were a startling, milky white, clouded and opaque, seeing nothing. He was not wearing the blindfold she had heard spoken of in tales. It lay coiled on the arm of his throne, like a sleeping serpent. The choice to leave his ruined eyes exposed was infinitely more unsettling. Lyra stopped, her heart hammering against her ribs. The silence stretched, thick and heavy. She watched him, and he, in turn, seemed to be listening to the very air around her. "You have come," he said. His voice broke the silence, not with a roar, but with a quiet, resonant whisper that sounded rusty from ages of disuse. It filled the vast hall effortlessly. The seer. He did not look at her, his blind gaze fixed on the space far beyond her. Lyra found her own voice, a small, trembling thing. "I am Lyra. I know who you are," he said softly. "I have been waiting for a very long time." She took a hesitant step forward, her fear battling with a lifetime of morbid curiosity. Now that she was here, she had to see. She focused on him, on the tapestry of threads that made up the blind king. What she saw made her gasp. It was a maelstrom, a hurricane of snarled, violent threads of gray and black, pain, despair, loneliness, and a rage so deep it was almost silent, all twisting around him like a cage. They were so thick, so suffocating, that they should have extinguished any light within him completely, but they hadn't. At the very center of the storm, in the place where his heart should be, was a single thread. It was a thread of the most brilliant, pure, and defiant gold she had ever seen. It was the thread of his life, his truth, his very soul, and it burned like a trapped star, refusing to be extinguished by the crushing darkness around it. He was not a monster. He was a prisoner. "You see it, don't you?" the king whispered, a flicker of something, not quite a smile, touching his lips. "The storm I carry, the decay. It is not just a plague upon the land. It began here, with me." He rose from the throne, unfolding to a height that surprised her. He was tall, impossibly graceful, and moved with a silent confidence that belied his blindness. He descended the dais, his steps making no sound on the obsidian floor. "I was cursed," he said, stopping a few feet from her. "My sight was stolen, and in its place a lie was planted, a lie that grew, festering into this unraveling of truth. It consumes memory, color, life. It consumes everything. And I am its anchor." Lyra stared, mesmerized by the beautiful, terrible sight of his threads. The golden core pulsed weakly, battered by the swirling gray. "Your ability, seer," he continued, his voice intent. "You see the threads of truth and falsehood. My mind, my memories, have become a maze of them, a labyrinth of lies built around one stolen truth, the memory of what was done to me, the source of the decay." He held out a hand. It was a long, elegant hand, with pale, slender fingers. It was perfectly steady. "That is your task. I do not need you to fight a beast. I need you to be my eyes. I need you to look inside the storm and guide me back to the truth we have both lost. You must find the thread that started it all." He took another step, closing the distance between them. The air grew colder. "But first," King Kaelen whispered, his clouded, sightless eyes seeming to pierce right through her, "I must see you." He lifted his hand, not to her face, but to her own eyes. His fingers, cold as marble, hovered a mere inch from her skin. Lyra found she couldn't move, couldn't breathe. She was trapped in the gaze of a blind man, about to be touched by a king made of shadow and sorrow. The chapter of her life as a mad girl in a small village was over. A new one, terrifying and uncertain, was about to begin. Lyra's world narrowed to the space between her eyes and the king's hovering fingers. The cold emanating from his skin was a physical presence, a chilling aura that promised ancient winters. She held her breath, every instinct screaming at her to pull away, yet she remained rooted to the spot, transfixed by the swirling storm of his threads. This was her purpose now. This was her fate. His fingers did not touch her eyes. Instead, with a slow, deliberate grace, he gently pressed his thumb and forefinger to her temples. The contact was not a touch, it was an ignition. Her vision exploded. The throne room, the dust motes, the pale twilight, it all vanished, torn away like a cheap veil. She was plunged into a roaring, three-dimensional sea of threads. The chaotic storm she had witnessed around Kaelen was no longer something she was observing. She was inside it. Gray threads of sorrow lashed at her like whips. Black cords of despair coiled around her ankles, threatening to pull her down into an abyss of pure nothingness. And through it all, the single, brilliant golden thread of his soul pulsed at the heart of the storm, a distant, unreachable star. A cry of terror escaped her lips, but it was swallowed by the psychic noise. She was drowning. "Focus," a voice echoed, not in her ears, but directly in her mind. It was Kaelen's voice, calm and steady amidst the chaos. "Do not fight the storm. You will be torn apart. Find a single thread, any thread that feels stable. Anchor yourself to it." His instruction cut through her panic. Anchor. She searched frantically, her senses reeling. Most of the threads were wild, whipping around her with violent energy. But then she saw one. It was a thin, delicate strand of silver, humming with a low, quiet note. It felt calm. Reaching out with a hand that wasn't quite a hand, she grasped it. The moment she did, the violent storm receded, not disappearing, but pulling back to a safe distance, forming the walls of a vast, dark labyrinth around her. The silver thread she held was her only path. "Well done!" Kaelen's voice resonated. "You are a natural navigator of the soul. This place, this is the ruin of my mind, a labyrinth of memories, built by the curse." Lyra looked around. She could see countless other threads branching off into the darkness, translated content, some gray and broken, others black and viscous like tar. What are they? She thought, and the question was instantly understood. Lost memories, lies, scars, he answered. The black threads are the most dangerous. They are the active agents of the decay holes in my past. Touch them, and they will consume you. For now, stay on the path. I will try to guide you to something safe, a memory from before. Lyra could feel a gentle tug on the silver thread, a subtle pull from Kaelen's will. She followed it, moving through the silent, dark labyrinth of a king's forgotten history. It felt like hours, or perhaps only seconds, before the silver thread began to weave itself around another brighter strand. This one was gold, but a soft, warm gold, like afternoon sunlight. It pulsed with a gentle, happy energy. "There," Kaelen urged. "That is a memory of the sunken gardens, a place of peace. Can you see it? Describe it to me, Lyra. Be my eyes." Lyra focused on the golden thread, letting its warmth seep into her. She wrapped her consciousness around it, and the dark labyrinth dissolved. Sunlight, warm, brilliant, and real, it cascaded down on her, chasing away the chill of the keep. She stood on a stone path surrounded by the most beautiful garden she had ever imagined. Flowers in hues of sapphire, ruby, and emerald bloomed in profusion, their life threads a dazzling chorus of pure gold. A gentle breeze carried the scent of nectar and damp earth. In the center of the garden, a waterfall tumbled over mossy rocks into a crystal-clear pool, and standing by the pool was him. It was a younger Kaelen, his silver hair braided with small, living flowers. He wore no crown, only a simple tunic of forest green. His face was relaxed, full of a light and life that was now utterly absent. And his eyes, they were not the clouded white of the present, but a clear, vibrant violet, the color of twilight amethysts. He was laughing, watching as a tiny winged lizard with shimmering scales skipped across the surface of the water. The entire scene was a tapestry of pure, unadulterated golden truth. "I see it," she whispered, her voice filled with awe. She relayed the image to him, describing the impossible colors of the flowers, the clarity of the water, the way the light made his violet eyes shine. She described his own smile back to him. In the darkness of his mind, she felt a tremor run through him. A pang of sorrow so profound, it was a physical blow. It was the agony of a man being shown his own ghost. "It is as I remembered," he sent, his thought laced with pain and a fragile wonder. "Thank you." They lingered there in the warmth of the memory for a timeless moment. It was an oasis of truth in an eternity of lies. But the peace was not meant to last. A shadow fell over the garden. Lyra looked up, but the sun was still shining. The darkness was coming from the edges of the memory itself. The vibrant colors began to dull, the golden threads of the flowers starting to fray and turn gray. The decay had found them. Lyra, Kaelen's thought was sharp with alarm. Something is wrong. The lie is fighting back. From the edge of the woods bordering the garden, a figure emerged. It was tall and gaunt, vaguely humanoid, but made of shifting, viscous shadow. It had no face, only a gaping maw that seemed to inhale the light around it. Its threads were not gray or gold, but pure, terrifying black holes in the very fabric of the memory. The shadow creature glided towards the image of the younger Kaelen, its purpose clear. It was a memory eater, a manifestation of the curse, and it had come to consume this small island of truth. "Kaelen, there's something here," Lyra cried out in her mind, a wave of pure terror washing over her. The creature raised a shadowy claw. The younger Kaelen in the memory did not see it, forever trapped in his moment of happiness. "Get out," Kaelen commanded, his voice a roar of psychic force. "Break the connection now." Lyra didn't hesitate. She pulled her consciousness back, wrenching herself away from the golden thread. The beautiful garden imploded, and she was thrown violently back into the raging storm of his mind, and then, with a sickening lurch, back into her own body. She collapsed onto the cold obsidian floor of the throne room, gasping for air, her heart pounding. The king was on one knee, his head in his hands, his body trembling from the effort. The storm of his threads was more violent than ever, agitated by the intrusion. "Did you see it?" he asked, his voice a strained rasp in the real world. "A shadow, a creature made of black threads," she panted, pushing herself into a sitting position. "It was going to attack you. The memory of you." He nodded, slowly getting to his feet. "The lies have defenses. They guard the path. For centuries, they have been unopposed. They did not expect you." He turned his sightless eyes toward her. The formal distance between them had been shattered, replaced by the raw intimacy of two soldiers who had just survived the same battle. He had laid the ruins of his mind bare for her, and she had walked through them. "It was dangerous," Lyra said, her voice still shaking. "And it was a success," he countered, a new steely resolve in his tone. "For the first time in centuries, I saw the sun through you." He fell silent for a long moment, listening to the echoes in the ancient hall. "The tribute brought by the village is a guest in this house. You will be shown to proper chambers. Rest. Your work here is not that of a servant or a sacrifice." He turned to leave the throne room, his steps as silent as ever. He paused at the doorway. "You are more than a seer, Lyra," King Kaelen said, his back to her. "You are an anchor in a storm, and for the first time, I believe this storm can be weathered." He disappeared into the shadows of the hallway, leaving Lyra alone on the floor, her body aching and her mind reeling. She had survived her first journey into the labyrinth, but she knew with a chilling certainty that the memory eater she had seen was only a guard at the outermost gate. The true monsters were still waiting in the darkness ahead. The chambers Lyra was given were fit for a queen, and just as lonely. A thick layer of dust covered the velvet chaise lounge and the polished darkwood bed frame, a silent testament to the centuries the room had sat empty. A shadowy, silent automaton, seemingly woven from the keep's own twilight, brought her meals on a silver tray and disappeared without a sound, leaving her in a silence so profound it felt like a living entity. She spent the time between their sessions tracing the patterns in the dust, her mind replaying the violent, beautiful chaos of the king's memories. The fear had not left her, but it had changed. It was no longer the sharp, helpless terror of a sacrificial lamb, but the heavy, focused apprehension of a soldier preparing for battle. She was a partner in this strange war, a navigator in a storm of the soul. The thought was as terrifying as it was empowering. On the third day, Kaelen's summons came not as a command, but as a mental whisper, a gentle tug on her consciousness. She found him not in the cavernous throne room, but in the castle's vast circular library. Bookshelves soared into the gloom, their contents mostly turned to dust and whispers. Kaelen stood in the center of the room, near a large stone table cleared of debris. The setting was more intimate, the air that of a war room rather than a king's court. "Chasing vibrant memories is a fool's errand," he said as she entered, his voice resonating in the quiet space. "They are the most well-guarded. The decay builds its strongest defenses around the brightest lights. We are attracting the memory eaters, but learning nothing." He gestured to the empty table. "We need a new strategy. We cannot charge the fortress walls. We must find a crack in the foundation, a place where a lie first took root." Lyra understood, a memory that was already damaged. "A broken thread," she murmured. "Precisely," he said, a hint of approval in his tone. "I have been searching my own feelings, my own internal ruin for such a place. I believe the seeds of my curse were planted during my coronation, just before my sight was taken. The memory is confused, muddled. It feels violated. I want you to take us there." Lyra nodded, her resolve hardening. "What am I looking for? Anything out of place, anyone who should not be there. A lie hiding in plain sight." They stood opposite each other at the table. This time, when he reached out, it was not to her temples, but across the stone table, his hand open and waiting. It was an invitation, not a command. Lyra hesitated for only a second before placing her hand in his. His skin was as cold as ever, but the contact was steady, reassuring. The world dissolved. The transition into his mindscape was familiar now, a jarring but navigable plunge. Lyra immediately ignored the siren call of the pure golden threads and the ominous lure of the pure black ones. She was a hunter now, searching for something hybrid, something tainted. She found it almost instantly, a thick, regal thread of shimmering gold that at one point was brutally pierced and tangled with an oily, coiling black strand. It was like seeing a beautiful golden snake being strangled by a black viper. This was the memory of the coronation. This was their path. She took hold of the corrupted thread, and the labyrinth reformed around the memory. The scene was one of overwhelming grandeur. Kaelen, younger and radiant, knelt on a dais in a hall of white marble and hanging starlit crystals. His violet eyes were fixed on the ancient crown being lowered onto his head. Hundreds of fey nobles from every court filled the hall, their gowns and armor a kaleidoscope of shimmering colors. The air hummed with power and ceremony. "Describe them." Kaelen's voice echoed in her mind. The faces, the courts. Lyra's consciousness drifted through the crowd, a ghost at the feast. She described the stony pride of the winter court lords, the wild, joyful threads of the spring court emissaries. She saw envy, loyalty, boredom, love, 1,000 emotions weaving a complex tapestry. "It all looks correct," she sent back, a note of frustration in her thought. "Everything is as it should be." "Look deeper," he urged. A lie always hides in the shadows. She pulled her focus back, scanning the periphery of the great hall, and that's when she saw him. A figure half hidden behind a marble column, standing away from the other delegations. Most of the Fey nobles, even the weaker ones, radiated threads of intent and emotion. This figure was a void. Their threads were unnaturally muted, shielded, as if they were wearing a cloak of silence. "There's someone in the shadows," Lyra reported, her focus sharpening. "Their threads are wrong. They're muffled." As she tried to get a closer look to pierce the strange shield, the memory convulsed. A tremor ran through the marble hall. The figure behind the column seemed to sense her scrutiny and turned its head. For a single, terrifying second, Lyra saw two things with perfect clarity. On the figure's dark cloak was the embroidered sigil of the Summer Court's royal healer, a golden sunburst being constricted by a silver serpent. And the figure's eyes, from beneath a deep hood, glowed with a venomous emerald-green light. The moment she registered this, the lie attacked. The entire memory became hostile. The faces of the cheering Fey nobles twisted into grotesque, leering masks with empty eye sockets. The beautiful starlit crystals hanging from the ceiling began to drip a black, tar-like substance. The walls themselves seemed to bleed shadow. This wasn't a single memory eater. The entire memory was a trap. "Lyra, it knows we're here." Kaelen's thought was a slash of pain. "The entire memory is corrupted, pulled back." She tried, but the black thread of the lie had wrapped itself around her consciousness, trying to drag her down into the corrupted memory. She felt a tearing sensation, a spiritual violence that left her reeling. With a final, desperate push from Kaelen's will, she broke free. They crashed back into reality, collapsing against the stone table in the library. Lyra was breathing in ragged gasps, a searing headache splitting her skull. Kaelen was clutching his chest, his face a mask of agony. But they were not alone. A piece of the darkness had followed them back. In the corner of the library, the shadows were congealing, thickening into a familiar, horrifying shape. The faceless, light-devouring form of a memory eater solidified in the real world, its black threads making it look like a rip in the fabric of the room. The barrier was broken. Kaelen straightened up, his blind eyes fixed on the corner where the creature was forming. He could not see it, but he could feel the void it created. With a movement too fast for Lyra to follow, he swept his hand under the tabletop. There was a soft shing, and he was holding a sword. It was forged from the same black obsidian as the keep, and its edges seemed to cut the very air, humming with a deep indigo light. He moved to stand between Lyra and the creature, his stance that of a seasoned warrior. "It seems my prison is no longer confined to my mind," he said, his voice dangerously soft. The memory eater let out a silent shriek that Lyra felt in her bones and lunged, its shadowy claws extended. Kaelen was a blur of motion, his blade a dark arc, but he was fighting blind, striking at a creature that was barely corporeal. His first strike passed through its shoulder with no effect. The creature swiped at him, and Kaelen dodged, but a claw grazed his arm, and he hissed in pain. It wasn't a physical wound, it was a touch of the decay. Lyra saw the threads of his sleeve begin to gray and fray. He couldn't win. He couldn't hit what he couldn't see. But Lyra could. Her fear was eclipsed by a sudden, fierce clarity. She saw the creature not as a monster, but as a knot of threads, and like any knot, it had a weak point. In the center of its shifting, shadowy chest was a tight, pulsating core of pure black energy. That was its anchor in this world. "To your left!" Lyra screamed, her voice finding its power, its chest low. Kaelen didn't hesitate. He didn't question. He trusted her. He dropped into a low lunge, spinning to his left, and thrusting his obsidian blade exactly where she had directed. The indigo-glowing sword plunged deep into the creature's core. For a moment, there was silence. Then the Memory Eater let out a true, piercing shriek that shattered the ancient quiet of the library. It convulsed, imploding in on itself, before dissolving into a cloud of drifting, harmless dust. Silence returned, thick and heavy. Kaelen stood panting, his sword pointed at the empty space. Lyra stared, her heart hammering. He had trusted her. He had acted as her weapon, and she had been his eyes. The immediate danger was over, but a far more terrifying truth remained. The war for the king's mind was no longer a metaphysical battle. The enemy was here, in the real world. And the face of that enemy, she now suspected, wore the sigil of a healer from the benevolent summer court. The silence that fell in the library after the creature's demise was heavier and more terrifying than the battle itself. Dust motes, disturbed by their fight, danced in the pale twilight, the only movement in the cavernous room. Kaelen stood with his obsidian sword lowered, his blind gaze fixed on the space where the monster had been. Lyra stared at him, her mind replaying the perfect, trusting synergy of their actions. She had been his eyes, and he, her sword. "The summer court," Kaelen said, his voice a low, dangerous rumble that seemed to vibrate in the very stones of the keep. He finally turned his head in her direction. "The sigil you saw. Tell me exactly what it was." "A sunburst," Lyra said, her own voice steady despite the tremor in her hands, "being constricted by a silver serpent. I saw it on the cloak of the person in the shadows at your coronation." Kaelen went rigid. The threads of his emotional storm, which had calmed slightly after the fight, began to churn with a new, violent energy. A deep, guttural sound of anguish escaped his lips. It was not the roar of a king, but the cry of a man who had suffered a mortal wound. "That is the personal crest of the Ardligus," he whispered, the ancient fey term falling like a stone in the silence. "The high healer of the summer court." He leaned heavily against the stone table, his obsidian sword clattering to the floor. "Her name," he choked out, the words tasting like poison, "is Lyanna." Lyra watched, horrified, as his threads told the story his words could not. She saw brilliant golden cords of trust and friendship, now blackened and rotting, connected to the name Lyanna. She saw memories of laughter and shared confidence, now tainted with the gray of ultimate betrayal. "She was my friend," Kaelen finally said, his voice hollow. "My most trusted confidant outside this court. She was with me after the coronation. We shared a toast. To my new reign." His voice broke. The memory was a gaping black hole in his mind, a void he could never penetrate. Now he knew why. It wasn't just a lost memory. It was the tombstone of his former life. "That was it," Lyra said, the realization dawning with cold certainty. The toast, that was how she did it. The perfect crime, Kaelen murmured, a bitter, broken smile twisting his lips. A curse delivered by the hand of a healer, a lie wrapped in the guise of friendship. He pushed himself away from the table, his posture straightening, his sorrow freezing over into a terrifying, cold fury. No more hiding, no more chipping away at the edges. We are going to the heart of it. We are going to that memory. He looked at her, his sightless eyes burning with an intensity that needed no vision. This will be different, Lyra. The lie at the center of the storm will be the most powerful. The labyrinth will fight us. If we are separated in that chaos, I cannot pull you back. The risk is absolute. Lyra met his gaze without flinching. The girl who had been terrified of her own shadow in Silverwood was gone. You are asking me to face the memory that destroyed you. I am, he said, his voice grim, and I am asking you to trust what I see, even if it feels wrong, she countered, her voice ringing with a newfound strength. Even if the lie feels like the truth. A silent understanding passed between them. A general's pact before the final charge. He retrieved his sword, and she came to his side. He held out his hand, and without hesitation, she took it. The plunge was a violent, near-apocalyptic tearing of reality. The mindscape was no longer a passive labyrinth. It was a hostile entity. Great black threads lashed out at them like tentacles, and the shrieks of memory eaters echoed from the churning darkness. But their purpose was a sharpened spearhead. They ignored the chaos, focusing only on the gaping void at the center of the storm, the black hole that was the memory of his betrayal. They fought their way through walls of lesser lies and snarling shadows, Kaelen's will acting as a shield, while Lyra's sight cut a path forward. Finally, they stood before the void, and together they plunged in. They landed in a scene of serene beauty. They were in Kaelen's royal chambers, richly appointed and lit by the warm glow of enchanted candles. A younger, newly crowned Kaelen was laughing, his violet eyes bright with triumph and relief. Before him stood the most beautiful fey woman Lyra had ever seen. She had hair of spun gold and eyes the color of a summer meadow. This was Lyanna. The threads of the entire scene were a shimmering, convincing silver gold, humming with peace and friendship. Lyanna held up a crystal goblet filled with sparkling wine. To the Ashen King Kaelen, she said, her voice like honeyed bells, may your reign be long and your wisdom deep. The memory was so perfect, so warm, that Lyra felt a pang of doubt. Kaelen, experiencing it through her, was nearly seduced by it. Lyra, are you certain? His thought was hesitant, filled with a desperate hope. This feels real. This is the friendship I remember. This was the test, her sight against his heart. It's a lie, Lyra sent back, her own thought a blade of cold steel. Trust me. Look deeper. She forced her vision past the beautiful, shimmering surface, pushing through the masterful illusion, and she found it. Beneath the silver-gold weave, the truth was a festering wound. Lyanna's threads were not gold, but a core of pure, venomous black. The kindness in her eyes was a gray mirage wrapped around the same emerald-green malice Lyra had seen at the coronation. And the wine in the goblet was not wine. It was a liquid curse, its threads pulsing with the black, corrosive energy of the decay. It's poison, Lyra screamed into his mind. All of it. She's lying. The moment her conviction struck the core of the illusion, The beautiful memory shattered like a pane of glass. The world reformed into its true, ugly shape. The room was the same, but the candles cast long, sinister shadows. The younger Kaelen stood alone, his back to them. Lyanna's face was no longer kind. It was a mask of cold, imperious ambition. "The summer court grows weary of your potential, Kaelen," the true Lyanna said, her voice dripping with contempt. "Your insight is a threat. Your power is an imbalance. They do not want a rival. They want a relic, a sad old story to tell their children." She held the goblet out to the memory of the king. "We do not wish to kill you. Death creates martyrs. We merely wish to edit you. We will close your eyes so you cannot see our ambitions, and we will sever you from your own past, so you forget the king you were meant to be." As the memory of Kaelen took the goblet, a spectral version of Lyanna formed in the center of the room, turning to face them. She was a towering figure made of shadow and green light, the true memory eater, the architect of the curse. She focused on Lyra, her lips twisting into a snarl. "A little truth-seer," the being hissed, its voice a chorus of lies. "You unravel my masterpiece. I should have taken your eyes as well." The spectral Lyanna raised a hand, and a blade of pure black energy formed, aimed directly at Lyra's consciousness. This blow would not just expel her, it would shatter her mind. But as the blow fell, Kaelen roared, a sound of pure, liberated fury. He had seen the truth. The lie had lost its power over him. Within the mindscape, he closed his eyes, not in blindness, but in focus, and reached inward. He reached past the storm, past the pain, and seized the brilliant, defiant golden thread of his own soul. He pulled. The chapter ended, not with a blow but with an eruption. A blinding supernova of pure golden light exploded from Kaelen, incinerating the darkness, rushing to meet the shadow blade Hedden. For the first time in centuries, the Ashen King was no longer a prisoner. He was a fire, rekindled. The explosion of golden light was not a sound, but a feeling, the feeling of a lie being burned away by a truth so pure and absolute. It was incandescent. Lyra felt the searing energy wash over her consciousness, not with pain, but with a cleansing fire. The spectral Lyanna's shadow blade evaporated into nothingness before it could reach her. The architect of the curse shrieked, a sound of pure agony, as the raw power of Kaelen's reawakened soul seared her illusory form. The corrupted memory of the king's chambers dissolved, not into darkness, but into a swirling mist of gold and silver. Lyanna's spectral form flickered violently, her power undone. "You cannot erase what is done," she howled, her form disintegrating. "The decay has a will of its own now. It is a hunger, and it will consume your world." With a final spiteful burst of energy, she vanished, and the sheer force of Kaelen's unleashed spirit ejected them both from the mindscape. Lyra gasped, her eyes flying open. They were back in the library, kneeling on the cold stone floor. But something was profoundly different. The oppressive, soul-crushing gloom of the obsidian keep was gone. Through a high-arched window, a single, defiant ray of dawn was piercing the eternal twilight of the veil, striking a pillar and illuminating it in soft morning gold. It was the first true sunrise the castle had seen in centuries. Kaelen was beside her, his head bowed, breathing deeply not from pain, but from a profound and draining exertion. Lyra looked at his threads, and her breath caught. The violent, churning storm of his soul was gone. In its place, the single, brilliant golden thread of his true self burned with the steady, powerful light of a star, tired but whole. He slowly lifted his head, turning his clouded white eyes toward her. A look of utter wonder dawned on his face. "Lyra," he breathed, his voice filled with a reverence that made her heart ache. "My eyes, they still see nothing, but the blindness is gone." He tilted his head, a faint smile touching his lips. "I can see your thread. It is the color of a stormy sea, laced with brilliant silver. It is the most beautiful thing I have seen in 500 years. The curse that had imprisoned his mind was broken. He was no longer blind to the truths of the world, only to its physical forms. The realization was so immense, so joyful, that for a moment they simply knelt in the dusty beam of sunlight, basking in a victory that had seemed impossible. But Lyanna's final words echoed in the newfound quiet. "The decay has a will of its own now." She was telling the truth, Kaelen said, his new perception allowing him to feel the resonance of her final words. "Breaking the lie freed me, but the curse she unleashed, it has become a self-perpetuating plague, a magical disease. Freeing the host does not cure this sickness in the world." "How do we stop it?" Lyra asked, rising to her feet, her own exhaustion forgotten. "Every great curse requires an anchor," Kaelen explained, his voice now imbued with the authority of a king reclaiming his power. "A physical object to bind the magic to the world. The goblet, the one she used for the toast." He paused, his focus turning inward. She would not have destroyed it. The height of her cruelty would be to hide it here, in my own keep. A key to my suffering, hidden in plain sight. Their final mission was clear. They had to find the goblet and destroy it. Only then would the decay unravel across the lands. The hunt began. They moved through the castle, a place that was slowly waking from a long and terrible dream. Faint hints of color were returning to the great gray tapestries. The oppressive silence was being replaced by the gentle hum of the castle's ancient magic stirring back to life. Their new partnership was a seamless dance of power and perception. Kaelen, now attuned to the very magic of the keep, could sense the lingering wrongness of the curse's energy. He would lead them down a forgotten hallway or into a sealed chamber, his hand outstretched as if feeling the currents of a river. "This way," he would murmur. "The lie left a scar here." Then it was Lyra's turn. She would scan the area with her sight, looking past the stone and dust to the threads beneath. She would find the lingering black threads of Lyanna's magic, a spiderweb of deceit woven into the very fabric of the castle. "There," she said, pointing to a solid wall of obsidian at the end of a long-forgotten passage. "The threads are all wrong. They're knotted behind the stone. It's here." Kaelen placed a hand on the wall. He closed his eyes, concentrating. A seal of the summer court. An illusion to make the wall seem solid. He took a step back, his own hand becoming wreathed in the deep indigo light of his personal magic. He thrust his palm forward, and the light struck the wall. The illusion shattered with the sound of breaking glass, revealing a hidden circular doorway. Inside was a small, dark reliquary, and in its center, on a simple stone pedestal, sat the goblet. It was crafted from what looked like crystal, but it shimmered with a sickly, unnatural light. It was half full of a swirling black liquid that seemed to absorb the very light around it. A palpable aura of decay and despair radiated from it, so powerful that Lyra felt a wave of nausea. This was the heart of the plague, but it was not unguarded. Between them and the pedestal, a figure began to form, coalescing from the shadows of the room. It was Kaelen, a perfect, shimmering replica of the king as he had been on his coronation day, handsome and proud, with piercing violet eyes. But these eyes glowed with the same venomous green light of Lyanna's malice. It was the curse's final guardian, a memory given form and purpose, the echo of a fallen king. "You cannot reclaim what was so easily taken," the echo said, its voice a perfect imitation of Kaelen's, but laced with a cruel, mocking tone. It summoned a blade of shimmering shadow into its hand. Kaelen drew his own obsidian sword. "You are nothing but a scar," he said, his voice cold. "And scars fade." The two kings clashed. It was a battle of impossible speed and grace, obsidian against shadow. They were perfectly matched in skill and form. The echo fought with all of Kaelen's knowledge, but without restraint, without honor. It pressed the attack, its movements fluid and deadly. "You are still weak," the echo snarled, parrying a blow. "A blind man leaning on a broken girl. You are nothing without her." Kaelen faltered for a second, the taunt striking a nerve of old fears. The echo seized the opportunity, twisting its blade and disarming him in a shower of sparks. The obsidian sword clattered across the floor, sliding to a stop near Lyra's feet. Lyra watched in horror as the echo raised its shadow blade, ready to deliver the final, killing blow to the true king. In that instant, her purpose became diamond sharp. Kaelen wasn't just fighting his past self. He was fighting the very power that fueled the curse. She could not help him in that fight, but she could destroy the source. While the echo loomed over the defenseless Kaelen, Lyra broke into a desperate sprint, her eyes locked on the cursed goblet. The echo turned its head, its green eyes widening as it saw her intent. It was a race against a single, final second. Its blade began to swing down toward the king, just as Lyra's outstretched hands were about to close around the cold, crystal anchor of all their suffering. Time shattered into a million crystalline fragments. In the space of a single heartbeat, two destinies reached their climax. Lyra's fingers closed around the cursed goblet. A psychic supernova of pure, concentrated despair exploded into her mind. 500 years of Kaelen's pain, loneliness, and stolen memories slammed into her with the force of a tidal wave. It was an agony designed to obliterate the soul. Simultaneously, the echo's shadow blade sliced down through the air, aimed at the heart of the defenseless king. But Kaelen was not defenseless. Unarmed, yes, but not without power. Feeling the psychic backlash through Lyra, he threw his hands up, not to block the blade, but to unleash his will. A shield of pure, incandescent indigo light erupted from him, meeting the shadow blade in a deafening explosion of conflicting magic. The blast threw Kaelen back against the far wall, but his shield held. The echo, snarling with rage, pressed its attack, its blade grinding against the indigo light. The battle for the king's life was now a brutal contest of wills. Lyra was in her own hell. The curse was invading her mind, twisting her own fears into weapons. She saw visions of herself back in Silverwood, dying old and alone, the villagers laughing at the thread-mad girl. She saw Kaelen, his eyes full of pity, turning her away now that her purpose was served. The gray threads of her own self-doubt began to poison her spirit. The goblet was trying to force her to let go. A lie, she thought, her will flickering like a dying candle. It's all a lie. The thought was an anchor. This pain was not hers, it was his. This despair was the echo of his suffering. And the lie was already broken. She focused past the pain, past the visions, and looked at the goblet with her true sight. She saw the tangled knot of black threads at its heart, the magical engine of the curse. It was powered by a single, fundamental lie, that Kaelen was broken, forgotten, and alone. But he wasn't. Lyra gathered the last of her strength. She looked not at the curse, but at the brilliant, defiant golden thread she could now see across the room, the thread of Kaelen's soul, burning bright as he fought for his life. She anchored her own spirit to his truth. "You have no power here," she screamed, her voice ringing with absolute conviction. She was no longer just a seer, she was an arbiter of truth. She poured her own power, a stream of pure silver light, from her hands into the goblet. She did not fight the darkness, she illuminated it with the truth. The lie is broken. He is not alone. The crystal goblet began to glow from within, a violent conflict of silver and black. A high-pitched, agonizing shriek filled the air as cracks of silver light spread across its surface like fissures in ice. As the goblet's power wavered, so did the echo. It flickered, its form becoming translucent. It was a phantom powered by a dying heart. Kaelen felt the shift instantly. With a final, defiant roar, he pushed outward, his indigo shield flaring and engulfing the weakened echo completely. With a final, desperate cry of her own, Lyra forced the last of her will into the artifact. Fade. The goblet shattered. It did not explode into shards of crystal, but dissolved in a silent, blinding flash of silver and black light, turning into a cascade of harmless, glittering dust that settled on the stone floor. At the exact same moment, the echo of Kaelen let out a final, fading wail and evaporated into nothingness. Silence, pure and absolute, descended upon the reliquary. Lyra collapsed, her strength utterly spent, and Kaelen, free and whole, crossed the room in 2 strides, catching her before she hit the ground. Weeks later, Lyra awoke to the gentle warmth of sunlight on her face. She was in the royal chambers, the same one she had seen in the memory, but the dust was gone. The room was clean, bright, and filled with the scent of fresh air from an open window. Kaelen was sitting in a chair near the window, watching the world outside. He turned as she stirred, and a genuine, peaceful smile graced his lips. The lines of ancient pain had vanished from his face, replaced by a calm strength. "The decay is in retreat," he said, his voice soft and clear. "Color is returning to the furthest corners of the veil. The memories are returning to the people." "You did it, Lyra! You saved us!" She sat up, feeling a profound sense of peace. "We did it." He rose and walked to her bedside, taking her hand. His touch was no longer cold, but warm with life. "Lyanna has been named a traitor by the Summer Court. They are apologetic," he said with a wry smile. "Fear can make cowards of even the most powerful." He looked at her, his clouded eyes full of a light that had nothing to do with physical sight. The healer's toxin was woven deep into the fabric of my being, he said gently. My sight, in the way you know it, may never return. He squeezed her hand. But when I close my eyes and see the world through you, through the threads of truth you show me, I realize I have all the sight I will ever need. He lifted her hand, brushing his lips against her knuckles. You are my eyes, Lyra. You are my truth. Lyra looked at him, truly looked at him, with her gift. She saw his brilliant, steady golden thread, now calm and strong, and she saw her own thread, a shimmering cord of silver and stormy gray, weaving around his, no longer separate, but intertwined. For the first time in her life, her vision did not bring her a sense of isolation, but a profound, unshakable feeling of connection, of home. Her curse was never a curse. It was the key that unlocked a king's prison. Together, they walked to the window, looking out at the valley that was slowly, beautifully coming back to life. The outcast girl and the broken king were gone. In their place stood a seer and a king, reborn not by what they had lost, but by the truth they had found in each other.